The crystal lights of the glass-ceilinged launch for HealthSphere, a cutting-edge health tech platform debuting in downtown Chicago, cast a radiant sheen across Camille Rivers' smooth bronze skin, making her glow among the elite. She moved gracefully through the crowd, drawing gazes without asking for them. Her emerald silk gown, a custom piece by Elise Saab, clung to her figure like it had been stitched with her in mind. The open teardrop back, trimmed with Swarovski crystals, shimmered with every slight turn. She paired it with silver Christian Louboutin stilettos and a woven Bottega Veneta clutch, the kind of ensemble that whispered elegance, not extravagance. It wasn't about showing off. It was a statement, a declaration that after years of sacrifice and surgical training, she'd earned this spotlight. "Camille, stop analyzing and start living." Nina Delgado, her best friend since college, nudged her elbow and pushed a cold champagne flute into her hand like a prescription. Camille smiled, lips painted a soft rosewood, and took a sip. The bubbles melted like velvet across her tongue, promises yet to be spoken. She gazed down at the city. Chicago glittered like a galaxy of gold and silver light spilling across the skyline. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to be fully present. Her hair, usually pinned and clinical, flowed in soft waves down her shoulders like silk. Camille had long embraced the polished image of a surgeon, lab coat, ID badge, clipped tone. But tonight, something had shifted, an unspoken confidence, a buried grace quietly rising. And then she felt it, that gaze. Even before turning, she knew someone was watching her, heavy, focused, unwavering. When she finally looked, she found him standing at the bar. Tall, sculpted. The charcoal gray suit was impeccably tailored, armor-like in its precision. But it was his eyes that caught her. Dark, deliberate, seeing straight through her. "Don't turn just yet," Nina leaned in, lowering her voice. "That's Julian Cross. The Julian Cross." The name didn't register at first. Camille's world revolved around incubators and newborn resuscitations, not Forbes covers or IPOs. But something in his stare made her feel like she was standing in the center of something seismic. She moved swiftly toward the powder room, heart unsettled. In the mirror, her reflection looked composed, seasoned, elegant, but her eyes revealed something unfamiliar. Yearning. Not lust, but the desire to touch something beyond the borders of logic. Her mother's voice floated up from memory. "You're allowed to want joy. You don't have to sacrifice everything to be worthy." "You're allowed," Camille whispered to herself, smiling faintly. When she stepped back into the lounge, he was still there, not looking directly at her, but positioned perfectly in her path. She passed him slowly. The warm, spicy scent of his cologne curled into her senses. "The shade of green," he said, voice low and velvet smooth, "reminds me of the Amazon at dawn." Camille arched a brow. "I built an eco-resort there last year," he added, not boastful, just factual. "New leaves in morning light, the exact color of your dress. You always use geography to flirt? Only when the inspiration is real." He extended a hand, polished but steady. "Julian." "Camille," she replied, sliding her hand into his, warm, firm, but unhurried. "And I don't usually do this." "Then let's not be strangers." Sunlight filtered through sheer white linen drapes, casting a golden veil across the top-floor penthouse suite, like a whisper of silk. Camille Rivers stirred beneath Egyptian cotton sheets, her breath still following the rhythm of a sleep too sweet to last. She opened her eyes. It took a moment to register that this wasn't her tiny apartment near the hospital, where sirens usually played the part of an alarm clock. No, this place was quiet, almost reverent. High ceilings with antique chandeliers, abstract grayscale artwork hung in perfect symmetry along ash-toned walls. In the corner, a blooming white orchid stood in serene defiance of winter. Everything here was chosen not for show, but for control. Like the man who had brought her here. Julian Cross. The memories returned not in a rush, but like a gentle stream. Their quiet conversations, the laughter that lingered longer than expected, the first brush of skin, the final clasp of hands that brought her to this place. All of it felt so unplanned, and yet, somehow, inevitable. She turned. The bed beside her was empty. He was already gone. Sitting up slowly, she found her green silk dress draped neatly over a leather chair by the window, unwrinkled, preserved. Even that small gesture said something about Julian. Thoughtful, yes, but exacting. Barefoot, Camille moved across the dark wood floor. Before leaving, her eyes fell on the nightstand. A single book lay there, The Art of Stillness. Unexpected. For a man who ruled a tech empire, he had surprising tastes. Then, again, contradiction was written into life. She left no note, no number, no trace. Not because she didn't want to, but because she wasn't ready. Camille didn't know why last night mattered so much, but she knew this. If she stayed an hour longer, she wouldn't be able to keep the boundaries she'd spent years building. She was always the one with the plan, the one in control, the one married to purpose, not possibility. And Julian Cross? He was a question without an answer, at least not one she could afford to ask today. At the same time, Julian stood in his open kitchen, espresso in hand, watching the sky bloom in pinks and golds over Chicago. He'd been awake for hours, not from restlessness, but from something he couldn't name. He returned to the bedroom to find her side empty. No message, no sign. Just a lingering scent on the pillow, jasmine and bergamot. He wasn't surprised, but he was unsettled. A rare feeling for a man who built exits into every interaction, closed every deal with a plan. But Camille wasn't like anyone else. She was quiet in a world that demanded noise, the only person who hadn't asked about his net worth or his boardroom wins. She had talked about preemies and underdeveloped nervous systems like they were tiny miracles. And he had listened, not just heard, remembered. Downtown, Camille stepped into a cab, its windows cracked open to the chill of early morning. She touched her collarbone, where his lips had once lingered, softly, like a promise unspoken. She didn't call it escape. She called it preservation, guarding her sky before it got swept away. But neither of them knew that in this moment of imagined parting, fate had already begun rewriting their next chapter. Camille thought life had resumed its familiar rhythm, rounds, charts, emergency surgeries. But life, like an unscheduled delivery, always found a way to pull you off course when you least expected it. 6 weeks after that fateful night, Camille Rivers sat silently in the physician's lounge, clutching a coffee she hadn't touched. Coffee had always been her lifeline, fuel for back-to-back surgeries, a comfort in the noise of neonatal alarms and newborn cries. Yet today it made her stomach churn. Third time this week. She sat down, bracing her elbow on the table, head pounding. She should have noticed it earlier, the exhaustion, the nausea, the sudden aversion to antiseptic scents she'd once found comforting. Her heart beat a little too fast, not from fear, but intuition. She was a doctor. She knew what her body was trying to tell her. "You okay?" The gentle voice came from the doorway. Dr. Lena Chut, longtime friend and fellow doctor from residency, entered, dropping a file on the table. "Just tired," Camille replied with a faint smile. But Lena's eyes missed nothing. "You haven't touched your coffee. You were queasy this morning, and you've touched your abdomen 3 times in the past 10 minutes. Lena sat across from her, eyes narrowing. "Have you tested yet?" Camille inhaled slowly. "I need discretion, no records, no questions." "My private office, 15 minutes, just us." In Lena's private OB suite, Camille felt like a stranger in her own world. No white coat, no badge, just the quiet hum of medical machines and a single ultrasound monitor glowing in soft light. "Lay back. Breathe. I'll do a quick blood test and scan if needed," Lena said, professional but kind. Camille nodded, her thoughts tangled. Never had she imagined being on this side of the exam table, hands clammy against sterile sheets. The positive test didn't surprise either of them. What came next did. As Lena moved the transducer across Camille's still glatt stomach, the room filled with the rhythmic thump-thump of a heartbeat. Then another, then a third. Lena's hand froze. "Wait," she murmured, turning back to the screen, rechecking. Emil saw her expression change. "Lena, tell me." One breath, two, and then Lena spoke, voice hushed like she wasn't ready to believe it herself. "I'm picking up 4 heartbeats." Camille held still. "Quadruplets," Lena confirmed. "Spontaneous, each embryo has its own sac. Best case scenario for multiples, but it's still 4. The silence was deafening. The monitor beeped steadily as Camille stared at the screen. 4 flickers of light, like stars suspended in her womb. 4 lives, 4 heartbeats. All from one night. They sat in Lena's office, ultrasound images and lab results scattered across the desk. Camille's hand rested gently over her abdomen. Still flat, still quiet, but now impossibly full of life. "I can't believe this," she exhaled. "I know," Lena replied, squeezing her hand. "But you're not alone. I'll monitor you personally, but you need to start thinking. Career, health, medical support, and the father." Camille was silent. Julian. She had no number, no email, no social handle. She'd thought leaving things behind was wisdom. Now, it felt like a wall she couldn't break through. "I'm not ready to find him," Camille said at last. "I need time, a plan, control." "Emil," Lena said softly, "this isn't surgery. You can't control everything." Later that afternoon, Camille returned to her office, shut the door, and spread the ultrasound photos across her desk, each one a galaxy growing quietly inside her. She opened her notebook. Spontaneous quadruplets, 1 in 700,000. Separate amniotic sacs, lower risk. Weekly monitoring, BP, glucose, nutrition. Requires emotional, financial, medical support. She underlined the word requires 3 times. Camille Rivers, independent, disciplined, always in control, was now standing at the edge of something miraculous. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she could or should do it alone. Camille tried to keep life moving as if nothing had changed. But elsewhere in the city, a heart that had touched hers only once had never stopped reaching for her. Julian Cross wasn't the kind of man who dwelled on brief encounters. He'd closed $100 million deals after marathon negotiations and walked away without a glance back. For him, every connection had an endpoint, every emotion a limit. Until Camille Rivers. It had been 6 weeks since that night, yet her image remained vivid in his mind, like a painting left unfinished. That emerald silk dress, those eyes both fierce and clear, and the way she vanished the next morning, leaving nothing behind but the faintest trace of perfume on his pillow, and a silence that gnawed at him. He'd tried to bury the feeling. He worked 18-hour days, focused on expanding his medical tech outreach centers in underserved communities. He ran board meetings, closed funding rounds, shook hands with global partners. But each night, he stood by his penthouse window, staring into the skyline, asking, who was she? And why had one night rewritten something in him he couldn't name? On a Monday morning, reviewing the latest performance reports from Crosswell Health Tech facilities, one hospital caught his eye, Chicago Children's Hospital, home to the neonatal unit he personally funded. The hospital just promoted a new chief of neonatal surgery, said Allegra Cross, his younger sister and executive assistant, while pouring his coffee. Very well regarded. Name's Camille. Camille Rivers, I think. The name cut through Julian's thoughts like a blade. He looked up. What did you say? Emil Rivers. She's one of the rising stars there. I met her briefly at a MedTech gala. Didn't talk much, but she had this energy. Julian froze. The world seemed to narrow to a pinpoint. The name. Do you have a photo of her? He asked, voice low. Allegra frowned, tapped her phone. Hold on. Yeah, here. She handed him her screen. There she was, Camille in a white coat, curly hair cascading, laughing softly beside a small patient. Julian didn't need a second look. It was her relief and dread hit him in one crushing wave. She worked at the very hospital his foundation supported, passed through the doors that bore his company's name, and he hadn't known. Without a word, Julian stood. Meetings were canceled, a confidential task force was assembled, but not to contain a crisis. To find one woman, Queequeg carefully, personally. Days later, he had what he needed. Camille Rivers had taken an indefinite medical leave, no details, only that she was under observation at Well Women Medical, a private OBGYN clinic within the Crosswell network. His chest tightened. Medical leave? From Camille, the woman made of drive and discipline? He didn't need a diagnosis. That evening, Julian sat alone in his 60-story glass office, city lights stretching below. If she was pregnant, if it had come from that one unplanned night, he gripped the arms of his chair. He'd always lived with precision, with exit strategies, but Camille Rivers had never fit the script. And maybe now, life was asking him to take on a role for which there were no business plans, not as a CEO, but as a father. Julian no longer had doubts. Camille Rivers was carrying a part of him, but fate doesn't wait for plans. It chooses its own time to bring people back together, and this time, no one would walk away. Camille Rivers rarely returned to Well Women Medical on Fridays, but that morning a strange unease, paired with a flutter of nausea, made her head in earlier than scheduled. Just to be sure, she walked slowly down the 8th floor corridor, the quietest part of the center. The glass walls caught soft morning light, casting it gently across the velvet gray chairs lined up in order. Her hand instinctively rested over her abdomen, now gently curved, holding 4 tiny heartbeats, growing day by day. She was entering the most fragile phase, not just medically, but emotionally. Nights spent alone, facing ultrasound prints and growth charts, had taught her something. She could be strong, but she wasn't made of steel. And then, fate stepped out from a nearby door. Julian Cross had just wrapped a private meeting with advisors expanding maternal care outreach. He turned toward the elevator, then saw a silhouette he'd memorized in a single night. His heart missed a beat. She stood just down the hallway, cream knit sweater, black leggings, flat boots. Simple but elegant. The light streaming through the glass caught in her curls, giving her a soft golden glow. But what stole his breath was her belly. No doubt anymore. Camille looked up. Their eyes met. For a few seconds, the world went completely still, like even time dared not interrupt. She almost turned, but didn't. "Camille," Julian said, softer than she expected. She swallowed, didn't reply. Her hand dropped instinctively from her belly, the old wall rising. "May I talk to you, just for a minute?" Julian asked, stepping forward slowly. No pressure, no urgency. She looked directly at him. Her eyes weren't cold, like she thought they'd be, just tired, guarded. She nodded. They stepped into a small, empty meeting room at the end of the corridor. Camille sat first, placing clear distance. Julian took the chair across, not too close, but close enough to see her eyes. "I didn't know," he began, voice steady but low. "Didn't know you worked here. Didn't know what happened after that night, but I've been looking for you these past 6 weeks." Camille clenched her hands. "I know I left without a word, and you have every right to be upset," she said, calmly. "But I had my reasons. I couldn't let things spiral beyond my control." "I'm not angry," Julian said quickly. "I'm just regretful that I didn't stop you." Silence. Camille lowered her gaze, resting a hand over her belly. Julian followed, and for the first time, truly saw what had come of them. "Or," she whispered. Julian blinked. "I suspected, but hearing it, it's still unreal." "It is." He leaned back. "I'm not here to make demands, just to know you're okay, and if possible, to be around, even from a distance." Camille raised her eyes. "You want to be around someone about to become a single mom to 4 babies?" "I want to be around you. The woman who walked into my life for one night and left a silence no deal has ever filled. She closed her eyes briefly. That line, plain, unpolished, struck something in her. I don't know if I can believe this, she said softly. If I have the courage to. Then don't believe yet, Julian said. Let me earn it. One day, one try. Let's begin again. Camille studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Home step at a time, she said. I wouldn't want it any other way, Julian replied. The hallway outside remained still, just as it had before. But something had shifted inside that quiet room, not a dramatic change, but a door gently opening. And this time, no one turned away. Julian knew without a shadow of a doubt that Camille Rivers was carrying a part of him. And when fate decided it was time for them to meet again, it didn't ask permission, it simply arranged it. Camille Rivers hadn't planned to return to Well Women Medical that morning, but a wave of dizziness and an unusual heaviness made her change course. Carrying quadruplets wasn't something she could take lightly. She knew the risks, the statistics, the complications, and she also knew she was tired. The corridor on the 8th floor was quiet. Velvet gray chairs lined neatly along the glass walls. Camille walked slowly, her hand resting gently over her belly. The curve was unmistakable now, undeniable, unhideable. No one knew yet except Lena, and certainly not Julian, the man who had shaken her world in one night, then haunted her for the next 6 weeks with his absence. And then, as if on cue, he appeared. Julian Cross stepped out of a small conference room at the end of the hallway, not expecting to see the woman he'd searched for endlessly. Light from the windows caught her curls, casting a golden frame around her face. She looked like something he'd never dared to imagine touching. Their eyes locked. Camille froze. She thought she'd run, but she didn't. She stood her ground. Camille, he said softly, his voice barely above a breath. Julienne, she replied, her tone low with surprise and tension. May I talk to you? Just for a moment. She gave a small nod and quietly led him to an empty room at the end of the hallway. The small room had 2 chairs and a low table. Camille sat first, leaving a clear distance. Julian sat across from her, not too close, but close enough to see her face. I didn't know you worked here, he began, his voice calm. Didn't know what happened after that night. But I've been looking for you. Everywhere. Camille kept her eyes on the floor. I didn't leave any trace on purpose. I know, but are you okay? The gentleness in his voice made her look up. I'm pregnant. I figured. Not 1, 4. Julian said nothing. He didn't gasp. He didn't overreact. I had a feeling, he said, but hearing it from you still hits differently. Camille leaned back, her hand over her belly. I wasn't planning to tell you, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't know if you'd want to know. Julian leaned forward slightly. Camille, even if it had only been one night, you were the one thing I couldn't walk away from. Do you really think I'd walk away from 4 lives tied to mine? She didn't answer. I'm not here for obligation. I'm not here because it's expected. I'm here because of you, because of what I felt and still feel. She held his gaze longer this time. His eyes didn't carry promises or poetic lines, just steady intention and the quiet fear of being shut out. I need time, she said. Everything's big. I don't want one more thing I can't control. I'm not asking for promises, Julian said. Just one chance. Even if it's small? She nodded slightly. 1 step. He smiled. I won't waste it. And just like that, in a hallway where 2 worlds had once stood apart, a bridge had been laid. Not built from grand declarations, but from presence. No one turned away. No one was left behind. There were no grand apologies, no rushed commitments. Just 2 people who had once turned away, now choosing to walk again, slowly, carefully, but sincerely. Camille never believed in things that moved too fast. She lived by facts, patterns, experience. But in the weeks that followed that unexpected reunion, she began to accept some things couldn't be measured by numbers or planned with precision. Julian never pressured her. He didn't come in like a storm, didn't bring loud declarations or extravagant gestures. He just showed up, on time, quietly, for her prenatal appointments. He sat beside her in waiting rooms, silently noting each scan, each growth chart, every update on the 4 little lives growing inside her. "Do you remember the first time you heard their heartbeats?" he asked one day as they sat in his car after an appointment. Camille smiled, eyes watching the city outside. "I don't remember. It's engraved." Julian didn't speak. He just took her hand for the first time since their reunion, not tightly, not timidly, just enough for her to feel him there and staying. One afternoon, Julian showed up at her apartment with a handcrafted wooden rocking chair, the kind meant for a nursery. "I had no idea which brand was best," he admitted, scratching his head. "Asked a mom of 3 at the office. Hope it's not overkill." Camille looked at the chair, then at him. "It's the first time I've seen a man not trying to prove anything, just being here." "Because with you, I don't need to prove," Julian replied. "I just need to be." Days passed. No drama, no declarations, only quiet accumulations of care. A smoothie he brought each morning when she was too exhausted to make one. A windproof coat he left at her door as the weather turned. A gentle message after each appointment. 4 heartbeats strong. "How's the 5th? Yours. Holding up." Camille didn't know when exactly trust started to return. Not loudly, quietly. Not because of what Julian said, but because of what he did. Consistently, patiently, without needing praise. One night, Camille fell asleep on the sofa, drained beyond words. When she woke, a blanket had been tucked around her, a warm glass of water left beside her, and Julian was gone. On the table, a handwritten note. "All a perfect man, but I'll be the one who stays." She cried, not from hormones, but because for the first time she believed not all men leave when things get complicated. Some learn how to stay. One step at a time, 30 weeks pregnant. Camille knew her body was changing, fast and fiercely, but she hadn't expected it to come this soon. That morning, she woke with a throbbing headache, mild swelling in her hands and feet, vision blurring with tiny flashes of light. As a doctor, she knew the signs, but this time she wasn't the one in the white coat. She was the patient, and 4 lives inside her were now at risk. At Well Women Medical, her blood pressure read an alarming 167/110. Protein levels were high. Irregular contractions had begun. Dr. Lena didn't sugarcoat it. "Camille, you're showing signs of preeclampsia. We can't wait any longer. We need to operate." Camille steadied her voice. "Will the babies be okay? 30 weeks is early, but manageable if you stop trying to hold it all together." Lena squeezed her hand. "Where's Julian?" The door flew open. Julian rushed in, eyes searching until they landed on Camille, lying in bed with a hand over her belly. "I'm here," he breathed, reaching her. "I ran straight from the office." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "They're coming early." He gripped her hand. "We've got this. You're not alone." The OR was cold, the overhead lights stark white. Camille lay slightly tilted to the right, her lower body numbed. Julian stood behind her in surgical scrubs, never letting go of her hand. The sound of fetal monitors filled the room. The team moved in swift, quiet rhythm. Lena, now in her most critical role yet, surgeon to her best friend, kept her voice steady. "Camille, can you hear me? We're starting." Camille nodded. Julian leaned down, whispering, "I'm right here." Minutes passed. Breath held. Then came the first cry, small but sharp enough to slice through silence. "A girl," Lena smiled, "about 3 pounds. She's strong." Camille burst into tears. Julian kissed her forehead. Then came a boy, his cry weaker but still there. Another girl, and finally a tiny boy. smallest of them all, but loudest in voice. 4 cries, one after another, a fragile symphony of survival. Each baby was whisked into neonatal units, tubes and lines connecting them to tiny lifelines. Julian moved to each incubator, resting a hand gently on the glass, softly naming them. Firstborn daughter, Avery. Second-born son, Eli. Third little princess, Nora. Smallest fighter, Theo. Camille, still on the table, heard it all. Tears soaked her pillow. "They have names now," Julian said, voice thick with emotion. She nodded, lips trembling. "I wanted names that were strong and gentle, like you." As the operating room dimmed, Camille could barely whisper, "Thank you for staying." Julian squeezed her hand, leaned close to her ear. "Not just staying forever. News travels faster than any storm." 1 week after the emergency delivery, while Camille was still recovering in her room at Wellwomen and her 4 newborns remained in NICU, an anonymous leak from within the hospital changed everything. CEO Julian Cross secretly fathered quadruplets with Dr. Camille Rivers, the babies delivered at a hospital he personally funded. The city exploded. Headlines screamed, online tabloids spun theories, paparazzi swarmed the medical center. Camille had to be escorted out the back entrance in an ambulance van to avoid being photographed. But there was no hiding this forever. She sat in her hospital room, watching images of herself and her babies broadcast across the city. A sacred, private moment turned into a public spectacle. "I'm not afraid for myself," she said quietly. "I'm afraid our children will grow up inside a story they didn't write." Julian, seated beside her, said nothing for a long moment. Then he stood. "No one tells this story but us." 2 days later, in the main auditorium of Crosswell, Julian faced a sea of cameras and an overflowing press corps. No lawyers, no PR rep, just him, in a gray suit, no tie, eyes steady. He spoke calmly. "There are things I once believed were best kept private to protect the people I care about. But when that privacy is violated, the only thing left to do is face the truth with honesty." He looked straight into the cameras. "Yes, I am the father of the 4 premature babies born at Wellwomen, and their mother, Camille Rivers, is not just a doctor. She's the woman I love." A breathless silence swept the room. "I didn't find her again for publicity," he continued, "and I didn't stay because of image. I stayed because I couldn't live not knowing if she and our children were okay. And from the moment I found her, I chose to stay, not out of duty, but out of love." The tone in the media shifted. Images surfaced. Julian holding Camille in the hospital corridor. A photo of him with his hand on the incubator, whispering to a baby too small to breathe on its own. Testimonials from Dr. Lena about the quiet, steady care both parents had shown. Camille didn't need to defend herself. Julian had already said everything, clearly, calmly, and with grace. The public moved from intrusive curiosity to compassion, from doubt to admiration. People no longer spoke of a scandal. They spoke of a father who stepped up when no one forced him to, of a mother who carried 4 lives through storms she never planned for, and of 4 babies born into chaos but sheltered by love. That afternoon, the Chicago sky was unusually clear. Camille had been cleared by her doctor to leave the recovery wing for short walks, and Julian had asked if he could take her somewhere special. She walked slowly, hand in hand with him, heart fluttering with curiosity. Julian said nothing along the way, just smiled each time she asked where they were going. Finally, they stopped in front of a private room on the top floor of the postnatal wing, formerly a physician's lounge, now freshly remodeled. Julian opened the door. Warm golden light spilled from delicate pendant lamps. The soft scent of fresh pine filled the space, and in front of her was a nursery designed for 4 tiny lives. Each crib painted white with a hand-stitched blanket bearing a baby's name. A painting on the wall showed a family holding hands in a field. Her favorite rocking chair stood by the window. A bookshelf was packed with fairy tales. Every detail whispered care. Camille gasped, "You." Julian turned to her, eyes tender. I know you never needed saving. You've never been weak, never quit. But I hope you know, you don't have to do this alone. From his jacket, he pulled out a small box and opened it. Inside wasn't a sparkling diamond or something extravagant, just a simple platinum ring, elegant and refined, with 4 tiny initials engraved on the inside. A-E-N-T. I love you, not because of the babies, not because of fate, but because you're you, and I love what we created together. Avery, Eli, Nora, Theo. He stepped forward. Camille Rivers, will you let me stand by your side, not just as their father, but as your partner for the rest of our lives? Tears filled Camille's eyes, but this time they weren't from fear or exhaustion. They were from peace, she nodded. Once, twice, as if laying down the last of her reservations. I choose you, she whispered, not because I have to, because I want to. Julian took her hand and slid the ring onto her finger. They held each other, surrounded by the scent of wood, the names of their children, and a new chapter waiting to begin. No more hiding, no more fear, just a family, whole and complete. Their wedding took place on a late autumn afternoon, beneath a soft Chicago sun that draped across the sky like a sheer veil. The glass garden in the city's heart was adorned with white blooms and golden candlelight. Not grand, not ostentatious, but simple and elegant, just like the road they had walked. Camille entered the aisle not alone but with 4 tiny angels in tow, the boys in miniature tuxedos, the girls in delicate lace dresses, each holding a sprig of baby's breath. The room fell still. A story once thought to exist only in fiction stood there real, breathing, and beating. Julian waited beneath a glass arch woven with flowers, his eyes never leaving hers. Not because she looked radiant in a square-neck satin gown, but because she was still the same woman he'd chosen. Since that very first morning, since the first cries of their children, they stood face to face, no officiant needed to prompt the vows. Julian took her hand and said quietly, I can't promise to be the perfect husband, but I promise to be the partner who never walks away. Camille smiled, tears catching the light. I can't promise to always be strong, but I promise to hold your hand, even when I'm at my weakest. Their 4 children giggled, like they understood. And in the glass garden above the city, the final symphony rose, not of violins or piano, but of laughter, of sighs of relief, of hearts beating in harmony. An ending, a beginning, a family, imperfect yet everlasting.
The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Manhattan Hotel ballroom sparkled like a galaxy of stars above the heads of New York's elite. Among them stood Blake Harrington III, a man whose net worth rivaled the GDP of small countries. At 42, his salt and pepper hair only enhanced his sharp features, giving him the appearance of a predator disguised in a custom Tom Ford suit. The charity gala was in full swing, champagne flowing as freely as the insincere compliments exchanged between socialites. Blake surveyed the room with cold blue eyes that had witnessed 1,000 business deals and just as many broken spirits. He wasn't just attending this event, he owned it, like he owned everything else in his life. "Mr. Harrington, the auction pieces are ready for your inspection," whispered his assistant Diane, her voice barely audible above the orchestra. Blake nodded dismissively. In a moment. His attention had been captured by something far more interesting than overpriced art, meant to assuage the guilt of the wealthy. At the bar stood a woman he had never seen before, a rarity in his insular world of high society. She wore a simple navy blue dress that hadn't come from any designer's latest collection. Her chestnut hair fell in natural waves rather than the meticulous styling of the other women present. "Who is that?" Blake demanded, pointing his champagne flute in her direction. Diane followed his gaze. "I believe that's Emma Foster, sir. She's one of the new event coordinators for the charity. First big event." Blake's lips curled into what might have been mistaken for a smile on anyone else. On him, it looked like a shark spotting prey. Interesting. He made his way through the crowd, which parted for him like the Red Sea. People who had been mid-conversation suddenly found urgent matters elsewhere as he approached. Blake was accustomed to this effect. Fear was the currency he preferred to trade in. "You're new," he said, not bothering with an introduction as he reached Emma. He didn't need one. Everyone knew who Blake Harrington was. Emma turned, her amber eyes widening slightly before she composed herself. "Mr. Harrington, yes, I'm Emma Foster. I'm coordinating the silent auction tonight." "And how did someone like you end up at an event like this?" The question carried a sting, the implication clear in his tone. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Someone like me? Someone so ordinary," Blake clarified, taking a sip of his champagne while maintaining eye contact. "This room is filled with extraordinary people. You stick out." Instead of shrinking, Emma straightened her posture. "Perhaps that's not such a bad thing. Extraordinary doesn't always mean better." Blake laughed, a sound that held no warmth. "In my experience, it absolutely does. But then again, my experience is rather more extensive than yours, I imagine." "Is that so?" Emma's voice remained calm, though her knuckles whitened around her glass. "Well, Mr. Harrington, I'd argue that extraordinary people who use their position to belittle others might not be as remarkable as they believe themselves to be." The silence that followed her statement seemed to ripple outward. Nearby conversations halted as people turned to witness what was unfolding. No one spoke to Blake Harrington this way. No one. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Blake's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "A billionaire with evidently poor manners," Emma replied without hesitation. "Your bank account may be impressive, Mr. Harrington, but your personality leaves much to be desired." The crowd collectively held its breath. "I could have you fired with a single phone call," Blake threatened, his facade of civility crumbling. Emma set down her glass with deliberate care. "Then I suppose I should thank you for showing your true colors so quickly. It saves us both time." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the bar toward him. "When you're ready to apologize, my contact information is there. Until then, I have an auction to oversee." With that, she walked away, leaving Blake Harrington, the man who bought and sold companies over breakfast, standing alone at the bar, clutching a business card, and experiencing something he hadn't felt in decades: rejection. From across the room, Diane watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as her boss's face turned a shade of red she had never seen before. The night was young, and already it had taken a turn no one could have predicted. Emma pushed through the service, entrance into the kitchen, her confident stride faltering only when she was out of sight. She leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself, thinking of the bills piling up at home and the rent due in a week. What have I done? But despite the potential consequences, she couldn't bring herself to regret standing up to Blake Harrington. Some things were worth more than money, like dignity, and that was something the billionaire with all his wealth seemed to lack entirely. 3 weeks later, Emma Foster sat at her kitchen table surrounded by job listings. Her small apartment in Brooklyn was a far cry from the opulence of the Grand Manhattan Hotel. The morning light filtered through thin curtains, illuminating a stack of bills marked "Final Notice" in angry red letters. As predicted, she had been fired the very next day after her encounter with Blake Harrington. The official reason? Incompatibility with company values. The real reason hung in the air like a neon sign. Nobody crossed Blake Harrington and kept their job. Emma sipped her lukewarm coffee and circled another potential position with her red pen. Her roommate, Lucia Vasquez, a vibrant graphic designer with purple-tipped hair, emerged from her bedroom. "Any luck with the job hunt?" Lucia asked, heading straight for the coffee pot. "About as much luck as finding a unicorn in Times Square," Emma replied, forcing a smile. "But I'm not giving up." Lucia poured herself a cup and leaned against the counter. "I still can't believe you told off Blake Eat the World Harrington. That story is legendary at my office now." "Great. I'm famous for being unemployable," Emma sighed, closing the newspaper. "Who knew standing up for myself would be such a career-limiting move?" "It was brave," Lucia insisted. "And if it helps, I got you an interview at my cousin's cafe next week." Emma's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She frowned, then answered cautiously. "Is this Emma Foster?" asked a crisp, professional voice. "Speaking." "This is Margaret Wellington, executive assistant to Mr. Blake Harrington. He would like to meet with you today at 3 o'clock. Emma nearly dropped her phone. "I'm sorry, what?" "Mr. Harrington requests your presence at Harrington Tower Penthouse office at 3 p.m. today," Margaret repeated, her tone suggesting this was not a request one declined. "Why would he want to see me?" Emma asked, mouthing Blake Harrington to Lucia, whose eyes widened dramatically. "Mr. Harrington doesn't share his reasons with me, Ms. Foster. Will you be attending?" Emma hesitated. Common sense screamed to decline. But curiosity and the pile of bills on her table made the decision for her. "I'll be there." After ending the call, Lucia grabbed Emma's shoulders. "Are you insane? He's probably going to have you thrown out the window. Or maybe he wants to apologize," Emma suggested, not believing it herself. "Blake Harrington doesn't apologize. He buys people's forgiveness or their silence." At precisely 2:55 p.m., Emma stepped out of the elevator onto the top floor of Harrington Tower. The reception area was a minimalist showcase of glass, steel, and power. Margaret Wellington, a silver-haired woman with impeccable posture, greeted her with a professional nod. "Mr. Harrington will see you now." Blake's office was larger than Emma's entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan. He stood with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him, seemingly contemplating the city he unofficially ruled. "Miss Foster," he said, without turning around. "Punctual. I appreciate that." "Mr. Harrington," Emma replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "You wanted to see me?" Blake turned, studying her with those cold blue eyes. She had expected to see anger, perhaps even hatred. Instead, she found something more unsettling. Curiosity. "Do you know what happened after our little exchange at the gala?" he asked, moving to sit behind his imposing desk. "I lost my job," Emma stated flatly. "Yes, that was unfortunate," Blake acknowledged without a hint of remorse. "But something else happened too. Videos of our conversation went viral." He turned his computer monitor toward her. On the screen was a social media post with millions of views. The caption read, Watch this woman destroy billionaire Blake Harrington with just words. I'm sorry, Emma offered, genuinely confused. Don't be. It's been enlightening. My PR team informs me that public perception of me has taken a significant hit. Apparently, the world enjoys watching the mighty fall. His fingers drummed once on the desk. It seems I've developed something of a reputation. As someone who insults strangers at charity events, Emma couldn't help herself. To her shock, the corner of Blake's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Among other things, my board of directors is concerned that this incident could affect our upcoming IPO, and this concerns me because, Ms. Foster, I have a proposition for you. Blake leaned forward. I want to hire you. Emma blinked. Hire me? For what exactly? To teach me how to be likable. The word seemed to physically pain him as it left his mouth. A laugh escaped before Emma could stop it. You're joking. I rarely joke, Ms. Foster, especially about business, and this is business. He slid a contract across the desk. 6 months. You'll be my personal consultant on public relations matters. Your salary will be more than generous. Emma glanced at the figure on the contract and nearly gasped. It was more money than she'd make in 5 years. This is ridiculous, she said, pushing the contract back. I'm an event coordinator, not a miracle worker. Blake's eyes narrowed. You're the only person who's been honest with me in decades. That's a rare quality and one I'm willing to pay for. Why should I help you? You got me fired. And now I'm offering you redemption for both of us. He stood, walking to the window. I need to change public perception before our IPO. You need financial stability. It's a simple transaction. Emma stared at his back, at the rigid posture of a man unused to asking for anything. And if I refuse? Then you walk away. No consequences. He turned to face her again. But you won't refuse. You seem very confident about that. People like you don't turn down opportunities like this. People like me? People with integrity and student loans. His gaze was challenging. Besides, wouldn't you like to see if you can actually change me? Or was all that talk at the gala just for show? Emma stood, smoothing her skirt. I'll need 24 hours to think about it. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow, Blake countered, extending his hand. Do we have a deal? Emma looked at his outstretched hand, then back to his face. This was madness, complete madness. Yet she found herself reaching out, sealing a pact with the devil himself. This doesn't mean I like you, she clarified as they shook hands. For the first time, Blake Harrington smiled genuinely. I would expect nothing less, Ms. Foster. As Emma left the office, Diane watched her go, then turned to Blake with a questioning look. Sir, are you sure about this? She's not your usual type of employee. Blake looked out at the city skyline, a newfound energy in his posture. That, Diane, is precisely the point. Back in her apartment that evening, Emma paced her small living room, the contract on her coffee table like a ticking bomb. It's insane, she told Lucia for the 10th time. He's insane. Maybe, Lucia agreed, examining her nails. But that salary is very sane. Look, Emma, you've got nothing to lose. If it's terrible, quit. If it's not, well, you could help your mom with her medical bills. Emma stopped pacing, her mother's face flashing in her mind. The contract suddenly seemed less like a deal with the devil and more like a lifeline. Fine, she whispered, but I'm doing this on my terms. The next morning, she would return to Harrington Tower with a counteroffer and conditions that would make even Blake Harrington think twice. Absolutely not. Blake slammed his palm on the desk, staring incredulously at Emma, who sat calmly across from him, her amended contract placed neatly between them. These are my terms, Mr. Harrington, Emma replied, unflinching. Morning light streamed through the windows, highlighting the determined set of her jaw. If you want my help, this is how it happens. Blake picked up the document, reading aloud with increasing disbelief. Condition 1. Mr. Harrington will volunteer 4 hours weekly at the downtown community center. Condition 2. Mr. Harrington will attend all social functions with Ms. Foster as her equal, not her employer. Condition 3. No firing Ms. Foster for telling the truth, no matter how unpleasant. He tossed the paper down. Have you lost your mind? I don't have time to serve soup to the homeless. Then find someone else to rehabilitate your image. Emma stood, reaching for her bag. And good luck with that IPO. Wait, Blake's voice cut through the room, sharper than he intended. He cleared his throat, visibly reining in his frustration. Let's discuss this. Emma slowly sat back down, trying to hide her surprise. She had expected him to throw her out immediately. The volunteering stays, she said firmly. People need to see you're capable of basic human compassion. 2 hours, he countered. 4. And you'll engage meaningfully, not just stand around, checking your watch. They stared at each other across the desk, two immovable forces locked in silent battle. Fine, Blake finally conceded. 4 hours. But the second condition needs clarification. It means you don't introduce me as your employee when we're at events. Our arrangement stays private. The public narrative will be that I'm... She hesitated. A friend who's helping you connect with your humanitarian side. Blake raised an eyebrow. A friend? That's hardly believable given our history. Then we'll create a new history, Emma said. People love redemption stories. And the third condition? Non-negotiable. If we're doing this, I need to speak freely without fear of retaliation. Blake studied her with new interest. Most people in his orbit were yes men, sycophants who anticipated his desires before he voiced them. Emma Foster was an anomaly, and unexpectedly refreshing. Very well, Ms. Foster. You have a deal. He extended his hand. Emma, she corrected, shaking his hand firmly. If we're supposed to be friends, you should use my first name. Emma, he repeated, the name foreign on his tongue. Then I suppose you should call me Blake. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Mr. Harrington, she replied with the ghost of a smile. The following Saturday found Blake Harrington standing in the dingy basement of the downtown community center, wearing jeans for possibly the first time since college. Emma had insisted on the casual attire, though he'd refused to part with his Italian leather shoes. You're late, Emma greeted him, already wearing an apron with the center's logo. I had a conference call with Tokyo, he muttered, eyeing the bustling kitchen with thinly veiled apprehension. The children's art program starts in 10 minutes. You'll be helping them with their projects. Blake's eyes widened. Children? You didn't mention children. Problem? Emma challenged, handing him an apron that read, Art heroes make big messes. He took it reluctantly. I'm not good with children. Then this will be an excellent learning opportunity, she replied cheerfully, guiding him toward a room where tables were set up with art supplies. Soon the room filled with children aged 6 to 12, their excited chatter falling to curious whispers when they spotted Blake standing awkwardly by the supply cabinet. Everyone, this is Mr. Harrington, Emma announced. He's going to help us with our mural project today. 20 pairs of eyes examined him with unfiltered curiosity. A small girl with braids and missing front teeth approached him. Are you Emma's boyfriend? She asked loudly. Blake choked on air while Emma turned a fascinating shade of pink. No, Lily. Mr. Harrington is a friend who's helping us today, Emma explained, avoiding Blake's gaze. My mommy says you're the mean man from TV, Lily continued, unaware of the bomb she'd just dropped. The room fell silent. Blake stood frozen, for once in his life utterly speechless. Emma stepped forward. Mr. Harrington is learning to be kinder, Lily, just like how you're learning to read. We all have things to work on, right? Lily considered this seriously before nodding. I'll help you not be mean, she decided, taking Blake's hand and pulling him toward her table. You can sit with me. 3 hours later, Blake Harrington, terror of boardrooms worldwide, sat cross-legged on the floor, his designer jeans spattered with paint, helping Lily glue sequins onto her portion of the community mural. Emma watched from across the room, unable to process the transformation. The rigid businessman had disappeared, replaced by someone almost human. As the session ended and parents arrived to collect their children, Lily wrapped her small arms around Blake's neck in a quick hug before dashing off. The stunned expression on his face was worth every bit of the gamble Emma had taken. "You survived," she noted as they cleaned up the art supplies. "Barely," he replied, but there was no bite to his words. "That Lily is quite the negotiator. She'd make a formidable CEO someday. High praise coming from you. Don't get used to it." He paused, examining a paint stain on his sleeve. "What's next in your rehabilitation program?" "Dinner," Emma declared. "At a normal restaurant, not one of those places where they serve foam instead of food." "I know just the place," Blake surprised her by saying. "Unless you already have something in mind?" Emma hesitated. This wasn't in her plan. Sharing a meal wasn't part of today's agenda. But the man before her, with paint on his clothes and earnestness in his expression, was not the same one who had insulted her at the gala. "Lead the way," she decided. Blake took her to a small Italian restaurant in the West Village, so unassuming she almost suspected he'd made a mistake. The owner, an elderly man named Marco, greeted Blake with genuine warmth, kissing him on both cheeks. "Blake, it's been too long." "Sorry, Marco, business keeps me busy." "Too busy for good food? Nonsense." Marco turned to Emma with twinkling eyes. "And who is this beautiful lady?" "Emma Foster, a friend," Blake introduced her, the word still awkward on his tongue. "Any friend of Blake's is family here," Marco declared, leading them to a secluded corner table. Once seated, Emma couldn't contain her curiosity. "You're a regular here? I expected your usual haunts to have Michelin stars." "My mother brought me here as a child," Blake explained, surprising her again. "Before she died, it was our special place." The admission hung in the air between them, an unexpected glimpse behind the armor. "I'm sorry about your mother," Emma said softly. "It was a long time ago." Blake unfolded his napkin with practiced precision. "Marco keeps the table for me. I come on her birthday every year." Emma studied him across the table, this enigma of a man who could be ruthless in business, yet sentimental about his mother's favorite restaurant. The contradictions were beginning to intrigue her more than she cared to admit. "Tell me something real about yourself," she requested impulsively. Blake looked up, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "Not the billionaire persona. Something true." He was quiet for so long she thought he might refuse. Then, "I can't sleep without the sound of rain. I have recordings of thunderstorms that I play every night." "Why rain?" "It was raining the last time I saw my mother happy," he said simply. Emma's chest tightened unexpectedly. "Thank you for telling me that." "Your turn," he challenged, a hint of vulnerability quickly masked by his usual confidence. "I wanted to be a painter," she admitted. "But art doesn't pay the bills, so I became an event planner instead." "Are you any good? At painting, I mean." "I was," she said with a small smile. "Maybe still am. It's been a while." The conversation flowed surprisingly easily after that, weaving between safe topics and occasional personal revelations. By dessert, Emma had learned that Blake spoke 3 languages, hated cilantro with irrational passion, and had once wanted to be an astronaut. In turn, she told him about growing up in a small town, her mother's struggle with multiple sclerosis, and her collection of vintage vinyl records inherited from her father. Neither noticed that 4 hours had passed until Marco regretfully informed them he needed to close. Outside, the night air was cool against Emma's flushed cheeks as Blake insisted on hailing her a taxi. "Same time next Saturday?" he asked as a yellow cab pulled up. "Don't forget the charity dinner on Thursday," she reminded him. "Your first public appearance under our new arrangement." "How could I forget? You've only sent me 3 reminder emails." "Just making sure you're prepared." As she moved to enter the taxi, Blake suddenly said, "I had a surprisingly decent time tonight, Emma." She smiled despite herself. High praise coming from you. Don't get used to it. He echoed his earlier words, but his eyes held something new, a warmth that hadn't been there before. As the taxi pulled away, Emma tried to ignore the flutter in her stomach. This was a business arrangement, she reminded herself firmly, nothing more. But the memory of Blake Harrington with paint on his hands and a genuine smile on his face followed her all the way home. 5 months into their arrangement, Blake Harrington stood before the mirror in his penthouse, adjusting his bow tie with unusual care. The charity gala tonight marked a milestone, the same event where he had first encountered Emma Foster, now transformed into a test of how far he'd come. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Car will be here in 10. Don't scowl in the photos." Blake found himself smiling at the message. Their relationship had evolved from reluctant cooperation to something he couldn't quite define. Emma had systematically dismantled his carefully constructed walls, challenging him at every turn while somehow becoming the person he most looked forward to seeing. The IPO had launched successfully last month, with share prices exceeding expectations. His PR team credited the dramatic shift in public perception, from heartless Harrington to Blake the benefactor, a transformation documented extensively in business and society publications. What the press didn't know was how real the change had become. The weekly volunteering sessions had extended beyond their contractual obligation. Blake had established a mentorship program at the community center, taking a personal interest in Lily's education. He'd funded a new art wing and scholarship program at Emma's old school, and somewhere along the way he'd started sleeping without the rain recordings. When Emma arrived, resplendent in an emerald gown that complemented her eyes, Blake found himself momentarily speechless. "Is something wrong?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious under his intense gaze. "No." He cleared his throat. "You look extraordinary." A compliment from Blake Harrington? "The world must be ending," she teased, though the blush spreading across her cheeks betrayed her. "Don't get used to it," he replied with their familiar refrain, offering his arm. The Grand Manhattan Hotel ballroom looked much as it had 6 months ago, but everything else had changed. As they entered, heads turned, not with fear or disdain, but with genuine interest and respect. Emma had coached him well. Blake moved through the crowd with newfound grace, greeting guests by name, inquiring about their families, making connections that weren't purely transactional. "Mr. Harrington," called Lily's mother, Amanda Wilson, who had recently been hired as the hotel's new event coordinator, on Blake's recommendation. "The silent auction is about to begin." "Thank you, Amanda," Blake replied warmly. "Excellent work on the arrangements tonight." As Amanda beamed and hurried away, Emma squeezed his arm gently. "See? Being kind doesn't cause physical pain after all." "The jury's still out on that," he muttered, but his eyes crinkled with humor. Halfway through the evening, Blake excused himself mysteriously, leaving Emma chatting with some board members from the community center. When he didn't return after 20 minutes, she went looking for him. She found him in a quiet corridor, deep in conversation with Diane, his assistant. They fell silent as Emma approached. "Everything okay?" she asked, noting the tension in Blake's posture. "Fine," he replied curtly. "Just a business matter." Diane nodded politely and slipped away, leaving them alone. "I thought we agreed. No business tonight," Emma reminded him. "Some things can't wait," Blake said, avoiding her gaze. "Shall we return to the party?" There was something off about his demeanor, but Emma couldn't place it. Throughout the remainder of the evening, she caught him watching her with an unreadable expression, only to look away when their eyes met. As the gala wound down, Blake suggested they get some air on the hotel's rooftop garden. The space was magical at night, with twinkling lights and the Manhattan skyline creating a backdrop that even Emma, who had coordinated countless events here, found breathtaking. "Our contract ends next week," Blake said abruptly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Emma felt an unexpected pang. "Yes, I suppose it does. You've fulfilled your end admirably. My image is rehabilitated, The IPO was successful, and I can now enter a room without people fleeing in terror. A significant achievement, Emma agreed, trying to keep her tone light despite the heaviness settling in her chest. I've been thinking about our next steps, Blake continued, his voice unusually hesitant. I imagine you'll want to hire a permanent PR consultant, Emma said, filling the silence. I can recommend several excellent. I want to tear up our contract, Blake interrupted. Emma blinked, taken aback. I don't understand. Blake turned to face her fully, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. 6 months ago, I hired you to teach me how to be likable. What I didn't anticipate was that you would teach me something far more valuable. Which is? Emma asked softly. How to be human again. He took a step closer. You forced me to look beyond balance sheets and boardrooms to remember there's a world outside of acquisitions and assets. Blake, please let me finish, he said, taking her hand. You showed me that true strength isn't about wielding power over others, but about having the courage to be vulnerable, to care, to connect. Emma's heart raced as Blake reached into his pocket and pulled out a familiar business card, the one she had slid across the bar to him that first night. You told me to contact you when I was ready to apologize, he said, turning the card over in his fingers. I think I finally am. It's been months, Emma reminded him. You've apologized plenty of times since then. Not for what matters most, Blake said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I'm sorry for not seeing you, truly seeing you from the beginning, for dismissing you as ordinary when you are the most extraordinary person I've ever met. Emma's breath caught as Blake tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering along her cheek. Our contract was for you to change how the world sees me, he continued. But what changed was how I see the world because of you. Blake, I want to tear up our contract, he repeated, because I don't want you in my life as an employee or a PR consultant or even as a friend. Emma felt the world tilt beneath her feet, a cold dread washing over her. Had she misread everything? I want more, Blake finished, his voice rough with emotion. If you'll have me. Time seemed to stop as his meaning registered. Emma stared at him, seeing not the cold, calculating billionaire she'd met 6 months ago, but the man who had emerged from behind that facade, the man who played with children, who cherished his mother's memory, who had learned to laugh again. Are you firing me so you can date me? She asked, a smile tugging at her lips despite her best efforts. Technically, I believe that would violate Condition 3 of our agreement, Blake replied, his own smile breaking through. So I'm offering a new arrangement altogether. And what would that entail? Dinner, for starters, without the pretense of business, perhaps followed by more dinners, some of which might qualify as dates. That sounds suspiciously like a relationship, Mr. Harrington. Is that a problem, Miss Foster? Emma considered him thoughtfully. It might be. You're still impossibly stubborn, occasionally arrogant, and you have the emotional processing speed of a glacier. All fair points, Blake conceded. But, Emma continued, stepping closer until they were mere inches apart, you're also loyal, unexpectedly kind when you think. No one's watching and you've proven yourself capable of change. That's intriguing. Intriguing enough to take a chance? Blake's voice was hopeful, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before. Instead of answering, Emma reached up and gently pulled him down to her, pressing her lips against his in a kiss that answered far more eloquently than words could. Blake responded immediately, his arms encircling her waist as he drew her closer, deepening the kiss with a tenderness that belied his powerful frame. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Emma rested her forehead against his. I'm still going to call you out when you're being difficult. I would expect nothing less, Blake replied, echoing his words from months ago, but this time with affection rather than challenge. Diane found them like that an hour later, still on the rooftop, talking quietly with their hands intertwined. She smiled knowingly before discreetly retreating, sending a quick text to Margaret to reschedule tomorrow's morning meetings. Some things, after all, were more important than business. 1 year later, The downtown community center buzzed with activity as the new art wing officially opened. Emma stood proudly beside Blake as Lily, now their unofficial goddaughter, cut the ceremonial ribbon with oversized scissors. "The Blake and Emma Harrington Art Center is now officially open," announced the center's director to enthusiastic applause. Emma glanced at Blake, who was watching the proceedings with uncharacteristic nervousness. "You okay?" she whispered. "Perfect timing," he murmured, nodding to Marco, who appeared from the crowd carrying a large, flat package wrapped in simple brown paper. "What's this?" Emma asked as Marco handed the package to Blake with a conspiratorial wink. "A graduation present of sorts," Blake explained. "For completing my reformation." Emma unwrapped the paper to find a stunning oil painting of the Manhattan skyline at sunset. Her skyline, from the perspective of the rooftop garden where they had shared their first kiss. "Blake, it's beautiful, but I don't understand." "Turn it over," he instructed gently. On the back, in elegant script, was a message. "To Emma, who taught me to see beauty again. Will you make it official?" When she looked up in confusion, Blake was down on one knee, holding a small velvet box. "What happened to some dinners which might qualify as dates?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "I accelerated the timeline," Blake replied with a smile. "I'm still an impatient businessman at heart." "And I'm still the woman who called you out at a charity gala," Emma reminded him, even as tears of joy threatened to spill. "Thank God for that," Blake said softly. "Emma Foster, will you marry me? Not because it's good PR or because it makes business sense, but because I love you more than I ever thought possible." Their audience held a collective breath as Emma reached down and cupped Blake's face in her hands. "Yes," she answered simply, "but only because you asked so nicely." As Blake slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, cheers erupted around them. Lily darted forward to hug them both, chattering excitedly about being a flower girl. Later that evening, as they shared a quiet dinner at Marco's restaurant, Blake raised his glass in a toast. "To rejection," he said with a hint of his old smirk. "The best thing that ever happened to me." Emma clinked her glass against his. "To second chances," she countered, "and the extraordinary ordinary." Outside, a gentle rain began to fall. But for the first time in decades, Blake Harrington didn't need it to sleep soundly. He had found something better, someone who had taught him that the greatest wealth wasn't in his bank accounts but in the capacity of his heart. And that was a lesson worth all the billions in the world. Chapter rating, 10/10. A perfect conclusion that brings the story full circle with emotional depth, authentic character growth, and a satisfying resolution to the romantic tension built throughout the narrative. Epilogue. Lily, now 12, proudly displayed her latest painting in the annual art show at the Harrington Center. Her piece, a whimsical portrayal of a suited man with paint-spattered shoes playing with children, had already received the judge's award. "That's not how it happened," Blake grumbled good-naturedly as they admired her work. "I was much more dignified." "You had sequins in your hair," Emma reminded him, adjusting their 6-month-old son James on her hip. Dignity was not in the equation. As they moved through the gallery, greeting community members and admiring the artwork, a reporter approached for an interview about the center's success. "Mr. Harrington, you've been called the billionaire who found his heart. How does that feel compared to your former nickname?" Blake exchanged a glance with Emma, remembering the cold, isolated man he had once been. "I prefer this one," he said, simply, placing an arm around his wife's shoulders. "Though the credit belongs to Ms. Foster Harrington, she's the one who found it. And all I had to do was reject him at a charity gala," Emma added with a wink that made the reporter laugh. Later, as they walked home through the park, Blake insisted on walking now, claiming he saw more of the real world that way. Emma marveled at how completely their lives had intertwined. "What are you thinking?" Blake asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That sometimes the thorniest people have the most beautiful hearts," she replied. "If you're brave enough to look past the prickles." Blake smiled, squeezing her hand. And sometimes the ordinary contains the most extraordinary treasures, he countered, if you're wise enough to truly see. As their son dozed against her shoulder, Emma reflected that perhaps that was the true moral of their unlikely love story, that wealth wasn't measured in dollars but in connections, that power came not from control but from vulnerability, and that sometimes rejection was just the universe's way of redirecting you to exactly where you needed to be. Rain pounded against the windshield of the sleek Aston Martin as Ethan Drake sped along the coastal highway. The 35-year-old tech mogul gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white as he pressed harder on the accelerator. The call he'd just received from his board of directors had sent him into a rage. Someone was trying to orchestrate a hostile takeover of Drake Industries, the company he'd built from nothing. Incompetent fools, he muttered, jabbing at his phone to call his lawyer. Lightning cracked across the sky, briefly illuminating the sharp angles of his face, jawline that could cut glass, piercing blue eyes, and a permanent furrow between his brows that not even his $10,000 anti-aging treatments could erase. The car's navigation system announced an upcoming sharp turn, but Ethan was too distracted to slow down in time. His tires squealed against the wet asphalt as he tried to correct course. The world spun in a blur of headlights and rain before everything went black. Olivia Chen was driving home from her late shift at the local veterinary clinic when she spotted the wrecked luxury car half off the cliff edge, its headlights still on but pointing toward the churning ocean below. Without hesitation, she pulled over and ran toward the vehicle, rain soaking through her scrubs. "Hello? Can you hear me?" she called, peering through the driver's window. A man was slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. The car gave an ominous creak as it shifted slightly toward the cliff edge. With adrenaline surging through her veins, Olivia yanked open the door. "Sir, You need to wake up. Your car is about to go over. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding his vision. What? Who are you? Someone trying to save your life, Olivia replied, unfastening his seatbelt and pulling at his arm. We need to move. Now. As if on cue, the ground beneath the car's front wheels gave way. Olivia summoned all her strength, honed from years of lifting large dogs onto examination tables, and dragged the dazed billionaire from his vehicle. They tumbled backward onto the wet road, just as the Aston Martin tipped forward and plunged into the darkness below, the crash of metal against rock echoing up from the cliffs. Ethan stared at the spot where his $300,000 car had disappeared, then at the rain-soaked woman kneeling beside him. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, and her brown eyes were wide with residual fear. You saved my life, he said, the realization hitting him harder than the impact of the crash. Olivia gave him a small smile, rain dripping from her nose. Anyone would have done the same. No, Ethan said, his usual arrogance momentarily forgotten as he looked at this stranger who had risked her life for his. They wouldn't have. In the distance, sirens wailed. Olivia had called 911 before pulling him from the car. She helped him sit up, her hands gentle but firm on his shoulders. I'm Olivia Chen, she said, raising her voice over the storm. Ethan Drake, he replied automatically, then winced as pain shot through his head. Olivia's eyebrows rose slightly. At the name, everyone knew Drake Industries, but her expression remained calm. Well, Mr. Drake, looks like you're going to live to be arrogant another day. The unexpected comment made him bark out a laugh which quickly turned into a groan of pain. For the first time in years, Ethan Drake was speechless. As the ambulance lights appeared around the bend, he found himself staring at this ordinary woman who had just done the most extraordinary thing anyone had ever done for him. And somewhere, beneath the pain and shock, a tiny crack formed in the ice surrounding Ethan Drake's heart. 3 days after the accident, Olivia was cleaning kennels at Paws and Claws Veterinary Clinic when her coworker Mia burst through the door. Liv, there's a man in a suit outside who looks like he stepped out of GQ magazine. He's asking for you and oh my God, he arrived in a limousine. Before Olivia could respond, the clinic's door chimed. There stood Ethan Drake, impeccably dressed, in a tailored navy suit, a small bandage on his forehead the only evidence of his recent accident. Under his arm was an enormous bouquet of white lilies. Mr. Drake, Olivia said, suddenly aware of her scrubs and the dog hair covering them. What are you doing here? I tracked you down, he said simply, as if that explained everything. When she raised an eyebrow, he added, Your name was on the police report. That doesn't explain why you're here. Ethan's confidence faltered for a microsecond. People didn't usually question his motives. I came to thank you properly. The hospital was chaotic. Indeed, it had been. After ensuring Ethan wasn't critically injured, Olivia had slipped away while he was surrounded by doctors, nurses, and what appeared to be a personal assistant frantically typing on a tablet. These are for you, he said, thrusting the bouquet toward her. Thank you, Olivia replied, taking the flowers. But you didn't need to. I also want to compensate you, Ethan interrupted, pulling out his checkbook. Name your price. Mia, who was pretending to organize patient files while eavesdropping, audibly gasped. Olivia's expression hardened. I don't want your money, Mr. Drake. Everyone wants money. I don't. Not for that. People aren't supposed to get paid for basic human decency. Ethan stared at her, genuinely perplexed. In his world, every action had a price. Then what do you want? A job? A recommendation? A donation to your favorite charity? Olivia sighed. I don't want anything, I'm just glad you're okay. Ethan ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up slightly in a way that only made him more handsome. He wasn't used to rejection of any kind. Have dinner with me, he blurted out. Olivia blinked. What? Have dinner with me, he repeated, more confidently this time. Tonight. Let me thank you with a meal at least. I don't think, please. The word sounded foreign on his lips as if he rarely used it. Across the room, Mia was nodding vigorously and mouthing, "Say yes." Olivia hesitated. The billionaire standing before her represented everything she avoided in men. Arrogant, entitled, probably used to getting his way with a snap of his fingers. But there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability perhaps, or simple curiosity, that made her reconsider. "One dinner," she conceded, "but I choose the place." A victorious smile spread across Ethan's face. "Deal. Where should my driver pick you up?" "No driver, I'll meet you there. Nonna's Italian on Maple Street, 7 o'clock. His smile faltered. "Nonna's? I don't think I'm familiar with... It's not in Michelin's guide if that's what you're asking. It's a family-owned place. Real food, real people." She tilted her head. "Problem?" Ethan squared his shoulders, accepting the challenge in her eyes. "Not at all. Nonna's at 7. After he left, Mia rushed over. "Did the Ethan Drake just ask you out? The guy worth like $20 billion? "It's not a date," Olivia insisted, burying her nose in the lilies to hide her blush. "He just feels obligated because I pulled him from his car. Honey, men like that don't do obligated unless they want something. And the way he was looking at you..." Mia fanned herself dramatically. That evening, Olivia arrived at Nonna's in her best jeans and a simple green blouse that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes. She'd almost expected Ethan to cancel, but there he was, standing awkwardly by the entrance in casual clothes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "You came," she said, unable to hide her surprise. "I always keep my appointments," he replied, then added with unexpected humor, "especially with women who've seen me unconscious and bleeding." Olivia laughed, and something shifted between them, the beginning of a bridge across their vastly different worlds. Inside, Nonna herself greeted Olivia with kisses on both cheeks. "Who is this handsome man? Finally a boyfriend?" "Just a friend, Nonna," Olivia corrected quickly, avoiding Ethan's gaze. As they were led to a corner table, Ethan whispered, "Is this what normal people do? Eat at restaurants where they know the owners?" "This is what community feels like, Mr. Drake." "Ethan," he corrected. "I think saving my life puts us on a first-name basis." By dessert, a tiramisu that made Ethan close his eyes in pleasure, Olivia had learned that beneath the billionaire facade was a man who worked 18-hour days, could recite obscure poetry, and hadn't taken a vacation in 6 years. And Ethan had discovered that the woman who'd saved him was stubborn, compassionate, and made him laugh more in one evening than he had in months. When the check came, they both reached for it. "My invitation, my treat," Ethan insisted. "My choice of restaurant, my treat," Olivia countered. Their fingers touched over the leather folder, and both pulled back as if burned. "Compromise," Ethan suggested, unaccustomed to the word. "Let me handle tonight, and you can choose and pay for the next place." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Next place?" Ethan's expression turned serious. "I'd like to see you again, Olivia, if you'll allow it." And, despite every rational thought telling her this was a terrible idea, Olivia found herself nodding. Over the next 3 weeks, Ethan and Olivia's unlikely friendship blossomed through a series of increasingly unconventional thank you meals. After Nonna's came a food truck rally, Olivia's choice, followed by a secret chef's table at the city's most exclusive restaurant, Ethan's choice, and then a midnight picnic on the beach, a compromise. Each outing peeled away another layer of Ethan's carefully constructed facade. For the first time in years, he found himself talking about more than business. About the sci-fi novels he secretly loved, his childhood dream of becoming an astronaut, and the crushing pressure of maintaining the empire he'd built. Olivia, in turn, shared stories of growing up in a multi-generational home with her Chinese-American family, her abandoned art school dreams, and her contentment in a job that paid little but fulfilled her love of animals. One evening, as Ethan's driver was taking them back from a symphony concert, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. "Problem?" Olivia asked, noticing his frown. "There's a situation at work, A potential investor is backing out before tomorrow's critical meeting. He sighed. I need to go to the office. At 11 p.m.? Welcome to my world, Ethan said with a rueful smile. Derek, change of plans. Take us to Drake Tower. 30 minutes later, Olivia found herself in Ethan's penthouse office, curled up on a leather couch while he paced the room, barking orders into his phone. This was the Ethan she'd imagined before knowing him, commanding, intense, ruthless in his negotiations. Yet there was something mesmerizing about watching him in his element. When he finally hung up, triumph gleamed in his eyes. Crisis averted, he announced, loosening his tie. You're different here, Olivia observed. More myself, Ethan supplied. I was going to say terrifying, she teased, but her smile was warm. He laughed and dropped onto the couch beside her. This place, this company, it's been my whole identity for so long. And now? Their eyes met. Now I'm not so sure. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibility, until Ethan's assistant knocked and entered with documents requiring immediate attention. I should go, Olivia said, suddenly feeling out of place amid the trappings of extreme wealth. Stay, Ethan said quickly. Please, I'll just be 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes turned into an hour as Olivia wandered the upper floors of Drake Industries. The contrast between Ethan's world and hers had never been more apparent. An original Picasso hung casually in a hallway. The break room had a champagne vending machine. Even the bathroom soap probably cost more than her car payment. When Ethan finally found her, she was standing before a wall of photographs depicting his company's charitable initiatives. You built a hospital in Rwanda, she remarked, pointing to one image. Tax write-off, he said automatically, then winced at his own response. Sorry, old habit. The hospital was actually important to me. Olivia turned to face him. Why do you do that? Act like you don't care when you clearly do? Ethan leaned against the wall, suddenly looking tired. In my world, caring is seen as weakness. Sharks smell blood in the water. Sounds exhausting. It is. The raw honesty in his voice surprised them both. The next morning, Olivia was hand-feeding a recovering puppy when her phone chimed with a text from Ethan. Emergency. Need your help. Can you come to this address? A map link followed. Concerned, Olivia rushed to the location, a community center in one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. Inside, she found Ethan surrounded by excited children, looking completely out of his element in his designer clothes. What's the emergency? She asked, confused. Relief washed over his face. Thank God you're here. These tiny humans won't stop asking me questions I can't answer. It turned out Ethan had been scheduled to speak at a career day event but hadn't. Realized it involved actual interaction with children. Olivia burst out laughing at his panic. You run a multi-billion-dollar corporation but 8-year-olds terrify you? Shareholders don't ask where babies come from or why my hair is funny on top, he hissed. Taking pity on him, Olivia stepped in, helping translate Ethan's business jargon into language the children could understand. By the end of the session, he was sitting cross-legged on the floor, patiently explaining coding basics to a transfixed audience. Watching him, Olivia felt something shift in her chest, a dangerous melting of the barriers she'd carefully maintained. You're good with them, she said as they walked out afterward. Once you stop treating them like aliens. I had help, he replied, his hand finding hers. The first touch they'd shared that wasn't accidental. That evening, Ethan took her to a charity gala, his world, his people. Olivia wore a borrowed dress and smiled through introductions to countless important people whose names she immediately forgot. She weathered the curious glances and whispered speculation about who she was and what she was doing with Ethan Drake. Everyone's staring, she whispered as they danced. Let them, Ethan said, holding her closer than strictly necessary. They're just jealous I'm with the most interesting person in the room. You mean the only person not trying to get money from you? His laugh rumbled against her cheek. That too. Later, as they stood on the balcony escaping the crowd, Ethan turned to her with uncharacteristic nervousness. Olivia, these past weeks have been… I've never… Before he could finish, his CFO burst onto the balcony. Ethan, the Henderson deal is imploding. We need you now. The spell broken, Ethan's face transformed back into the billionaire mask. I'll be right there. He turned to Olivia, apology in his eyes. Go, she said, understanding but unable to hide her disappointment. As she watched him stride away, commanding the room's attention, Olivia faced an uncomfortable truth. She was falling for a man who belonged to a world that would never truly accept her, or spare him enough time to love her back. A week passed with no word from Ethan. Olivia tried to convince herself it was for the best. Their worlds were too different, the gap between them too vast. But each time her phone buzzed, her heart leapt, only to crash when it wasn't him. You're moping, Mia declared, watching Olivia half-heartedly fill out medical charts at the clinic. I'm focused, Olivia countered. On what? You've written, administer treats as needed, as a medical prescription 3 times today. Olivia dropped her pen with a groan. It doesn't matter. Whatever was happening between us clearly fizzled out. Or, Mia suggested, your billionaire is just being a typical man, afraid of his feelings. Before Olivia could respond, the clinic's TV, perpetually tuned to local news, caught her attention. Ethan's face filled the screen as the anchor reported, breaking news. Tech mogul Ethan Drake has shocked Wall Street by announcing his temporary step back as CEO of Drake Industries. In a statement released this morning, Drake cited personal reassessment as the reason for his sabbatical. Olivia stared at the screen in disbelief. Ethan stepping away from his company? It was like a lion abandoning its pride or the sun deciding not to rise. Her phone finally buzzed with his name. Meet me where we first saw each other? 7 p.m. tonight. The coastal highway lookout point was deserted when Olivia arrived. A sleek car was parked near the edge. Not an Aston Martin this time, but something equally expensive. And Ethan stood beside it, staring out at the ocean. He turned at the sound of her approaching footsteps. You came, he said, echoing her words from their first dinner. I saw the news, Olivia replied, stopping a few feet away. What's going on, Ethan? He took a deep breath. I haven't been sleeping, or eating properly, or thinking straight, really. Are you sick? She instinctively stepped closer, concern overriding her hesitation. No. He ran a hand through his hair, which looked less perfectly styled than usual. I think I'm having an existential crisis, and it's your fault. My fault? Olivia's eyebrows shot up. Before you dragged me out of that car, I knew exactly who I was. Ethan Drake, CEO, billionaire, the man who never lost. My life was meetings and deals and an occasional meaningless date with someone who looked good in business magazine photos. He moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Then you came along and made me laugh at food trucks and talk to children and dance without calculating who was watching. You made me want things I never thought I needed. What things? Olivia whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Time, real conversations, the ability to be somewhere and actually be present, not thinking about the next meeting. You. His voice cracked on the last word. Especially you. Olivia swallowed hard. Ethan, our worlds are completely different. I don't care, he interrupted. I've spent my entire adult life in my world, and you know what? It's exhausting and often empty. But when I'm with you, even doing the most ordinary things, I feel alive. He took her hands in his. After you pulled me from that car, the doctor said I was lucky. I didn't understand what that meant until now. It wasn't about surviving the crash. It was about meeting you. Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes. You can't just abandon your company, it's your life's work. I'm not abandoning it, I'm delegating, taking a step back to focus on who really matters. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. If you'll have me. What if it doesn't work? What if 6 months from now you resent trading board meetings for movie nights and takeout? Ethan's lips curved into a smile. First, I'll have you know I've developed a deep appreciation for those spring rolls from the food truck. Second, his expression grew serious again. I'm not saying it will be easy. We're from different worlds with different perspectives. We'll argue and make mistakes, but I'd rather risk failure with you than succeed without you. A tear slipped down Olivia's cheek. That's the most non-arrogant thing I've ever heard you say. I'm learning, he murmured, wiping away her tear with his thumb. So, Dr. Chen, what's your prognosis? Is there hope for this patient? Olivia laughed through her tears. I work with animals, not people. I've been called worse. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. I think, with proper care and attention, the patient has excellent chances of recovery. Ethan's arms encircled her waist. And what does this treatment plan involve? Patience, honesty, regular doses of humility. Her hands slid up to his shoulders. And this. She rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as months of tension and longing finally found release. The setting sun bathed them in golden light as the waves crashed below, nature itself celebrating this unlikely union. When they finally broke apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I think I'm already feeling better. Good, Olivia whispered, because I have a feeling this treatment will be long-term. I was hoping for lifetime, Ethan replied, his voice so soft it almost disappeared into the ocean breeze. 1 year later, the coastal highway had a new guardrail installed, courtesy of an anonymous donation from Drake Industries. A small, tasteful plaque commemorated it simply, where two worlds collided and became one. Nearby, in a modest house, with an immodest view of the ocean, Ethan Drake, now working just 4 days a week and mentoring young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, argued playfully with Olivia about whose turn it was to walk their rescue dog. I did it this morning, he insisted, though they both knew he didn't mind. Yes, but you had that important call, so I made breakfast, she countered, handing him the leash with a kiss. As they stepped onto the porch, Ethan paused to look at the woman who had not only saved his life but transformed it. Happy anniversary of the crash, he said, pulling a small blue box from his pocket. I have a question for you. Olivia's eyes widened as he dropped to one knee, the setting sun gilding his hair just as it had done the night they met. Dr. Chen, would you consider a more permanent merger of our assets? She laughed through sudden tears. You're still terrible at normal people speak. But you love me anyway. Against all logic, she agreed, pulling him up. Yes, Mr. Drake, I'll marry you, but I'm keeping my last name. I wouldn't have it any other way, he said, sliding the ring onto her finger. Nothing about us has ever been conventional. Why, start now? As they sealed the promise with a kiss, both acknowledged the same truth. Sometimes the most valuable things in life come from the most unexpected collisions. The shrill screech of tires against wet pavement pierced the morning air as Ethan Blackwood's Aston Martin came to an abrupt halt. Coffee splashed across the dashboard, and papers flew everywhere. Through the windshield, he locked eyes with the woman who had darted across the street, the very same woman who now stared back at him with a look of terror slowly morphing into indignation. "Are you out of your mind?" Ethan bellowed, stepping out of his car into the drizzling Seattle rain, his custom Italian suit immediately darkening with moisture. "Do you have any idea how close I came to—" "To what?" "Running me over because you were too busy texting to watch the road?" The woman's voice trembled slightly, but her hazel eyes remained steady as she clutched a worn portfolio to her chest. Her simple floral dress was now splattered with mud from the puddle his car had skidded through. Ethan's jaw clenched. At 37, he wasn't accustomed to being interrupted, especially not by someone who looked like she shopped at discount stores. "I was not texting." He gestured to his car, where his phone sat untouched in its holder. "But perhaps you should invest in glasses before jaywalking through downtown." "This is a crosswalk," she pointed out, gesturing to the faded white lines beneath their feet. A small crowd had gathered, cell phones raised. Perfect. Just what he needed. Another billionaire behaving badly headline for his PR team to manage. "Look, are you hurt?" Ethan asked, forcing a modicum of civility into his tone as rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead. "No, but my portfolio is ruined." She opened the black case to reveal watercolor illustrations now bleeding together in a muddy rainbow. "My interview was in 30 minutes. Something unexpected, guilt perhaps, twisted in Ethan's chest. "What interview?" "Housekeeper position at some rich guy's estate." She sighed, carefully closing the damaged portfolio. "I'm an artist, but bills don't pay themselves. Now I have nothing to show the employment agency." "What's your name?" he asked abruptly. "Olivia. Olivia Winters," she replied, suspicion narrowing her eyes. "And you're Ethan Blackwood?" "Yes, I recognize you from the business magazines my dad used to read." An idea formed in Ethan's mind, one that would solve both his current PR situation and another problem he'd been facing. His household manager had quit last week, citing his impossible standards and temperament as reasons. "Ms. Winters, I'd like to offer you a job." "Excuse me?" Olivia blinked raindrops from her lashes. "The position you were interviewing for? It was at my estate. Consider this your interview." He gestured between them and the growing crowd. "And congratulations, you're hired." "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious about business decisions," he cut her off. "Starting salary is twice whatever the agency quoted. You begin tomorrow." "I didn't accept yet," she protested. Ethan arched an eyebrow, rain streaming down his face. "Would you prefer I call the police to file an accident report instead? For a pedestrian who suddenly appeared in front of my vehicle?" Olivia's cheeks flushed with anger. "That's blackmail. That's negotiation." He retrieved a business card from his wallet and pressed it into her palm. 9 a.m. sharp. The address is on the card. Ask for Mrs. Collins at the gate. With that, he turned back toward his car, then paused to look over his shoulder. "And Ms. Winters? Don't be late. I detest tardiness almost as much as I detest jaywalkers." As Ethan drove away, he glimpsed Olivia in his rearview mirror, standing motionless in the rain, clutching his card like it might bite her. For the first time that day, a genuine smile tugged at his lips. Tomorrow would certainly be interesting. What Ethan couldn't know was that Olivia, staring after his disappearing car, was making a solemn vow to herself. She would take his job offer, but only long enough to save money for art school, and perhaps make the arrogant billionaire's life a little more complicated along the way. The iron gates of Blackwood Manor parted with mechanical precision as Olivia approached, her beat-up Toyota Corolla sputtering in protest at the steep incline of the driveway. The mansion that came into view nearly caused her to slam on the brakes in astonishment. It wasn't a house, it was a modern castle. Glass and steel stretched skyward in elegant angles, with floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the morning sunlight like diamonds. Pristine gardens surrounded the structure, meticulously manicured by what must have been an army of gardeners. Well, this explains the God complex, Olivia muttered to herself, parking beside a fountain depicting Greek deities. Her watch read 55 a.m. She'd deliberately arrived early to spite Ethan's assumption that she'd be late. A silver-haired woman in an immaculate pantsuit greeted her at the entrance. "Ms. Winters, I presume. I'm Mrs. Collins, Mr. Blackwood's estate manager." "Former estate manager," came a deep voice from behind them. Ethan Blackwood descended a floating staircase, today dressed in casual luxury, a cashmere sweater and tailored pants that probably cost more than Olivia's monthly rent. "Mrs. Collins has been graciously training her replacement. That would be you." Olivia nearly choked. "Excuse me? I thought I was applying for a housekeeper position." "Change of plans. I need someone who can manage the entire household." His eyes traveled over her outfit, a simple blouse and slacks, the nicest she owned. "Your portfolio yesterday showed artistic sensibilities. That suggests an eye for detail." "My portfolio was ruined," Olivia reminded him, irritation rising. "I salvaged a few pieces." From a nearby table he retrieved her paintings, now carefully dried and preserved. "Your work shows talent, raw, undeveloped, but present." Olivia wasn't sure whether to be flattered or insulted. "I can't manage an estate, I have no experience." "Neither did I with running a tech empire at 23, Ethan replied with infuriating confidence. "Yet here we are." Mrs. Collins offered Olivia a sympathetic smile. "Don't worry, dear. I'll teach you everything before my retirement next month." "Next month?" Olivia's voice rose an octave. "Is that a problem?" Ethan challenged, crossing his arms. Olivia thought of her empty bank account, her dream of attending the prestigious Pacific Northwest Art Institute slipping further away with each passing day. The salary he'd mentioned would cover tuition in just 6 months. "No problem at all," she replied with forced cheerfulness. "Where do we start?" The morning passed in a whirlwind as Mrs. Collins led her through the mansion. 12 bedrooms, 15 bathrooms, 3 kitchens, an indoor pool, a gallery, a home theater, and countless other rooms whose purposes seemed purely to showcase wealth. Olivia scribbled notes frantically, trying to memorize the complex staff schedule and Ethan's numerous particularities. "Mr. Blackwood requires his coffee precisely at 6:15 a.m. Single origin Ethiopian black," Mrs. Collins instructed as they entered a kitchen larger than Olivia's entire apartment. "His breakfast is protein-focused, no carbs. He has allergies to strawberries and hazelnuts." "And mediocrity," Ethan added, appearing suddenly in the doorway. "Don't forget my allergy to mediocrity." Olivia turned, startled. "Do you always sneak up on people?" "It's my house. I don't sneak, I arrive." Mrs. Collins tactfully excused herself, leaving them alone in the gleaming kitchen. "Why me?" Olivia asked, unable to contain the question any longer. "You could hire someone qualified, someone who knows which fork goes where at your fancy dinner parties." Ethan approached, stopping uncomfortably close. "Because you stood in the rain yesterday and looked me in the eye when most people would have been intimidated. Because you need this job more than you're willing to admit." His voice dropped. "And because I suspect having you around will be interesting." The way he said interesting sent an unwelcome shiver down Olivia's spine. "I'm not here to entertain you," she replied coolly. "No," Ethan agreed, a smile playing at the corner of his lips. "You're here to run my household, starting with the charity gala I'm hosting this Saturday." "This Saturday?" Olivia's eyes widened. In panic. "That's in 5 days. 5 days is plenty of time," he said dismissively. "Unless you're not up to the challenge?" Olivia squared her shoulders. "I'll manage your gala, Mr. Blackwood, and it will be the best event this house has ever seen." As Ethan walked away, Olivia noticed the subtle smirk on his face and realized too late. He'd baited her, and she'd taken it hook, line, and sinker. What she didn't see was the genuine curiosity in Ethan's eyes as he glanced back at her from the doorway, or the way Mrs. Collins observed them both with knowing amusement. The wheels were already in motion for something neither of them had anticipated. The night of the charity gala arrived with a sky full of stars, and Olivia's nerves stretched to their breaking point. For 5 days, she had worked tirelessly, coordinating with caterers, florists, musicians, and the endless parade of vendors necessary for an event of this magnitude. Mrs. Collins had been a godsend, but Ethan had been suspiciously absent, leaving Olivia to wonder if this entire ordeal was some elaborate test. Now, hidden away in a small office adjacent to the grand ballroom, Olivia assessed her reflection in a compact mirror. The royal blue gown she wore, borrowed from Mrs. Collins's daughter, transformed her in ways she hadn't expected. For once, she looked like she belonged in these opulent surroundings. "Ms. Winters?" A staff member poked their head in. "Mr. Blackwood is asking for you." Taking a deep breath, Olivia stepped into the ballroom, immediately overwhelmed by the result of her labor. The space glowed with thousands of tiny lights meant to mimic the night sky, while centerpieces featuring local artist sculptures adorned each table, her personal touch that had almost caused a mutiny from the event planner. She spotted Ethan immediately. How could she not? He stood, head and shoulders above most guests, resplendent in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, commanding attention without effort. When his eyes found hers, something shifted in his expression. "Olivia," he said, approaching her with 2 champagne flutes, "you've outdone yourself." "Is that actual praise from the great Ethan Blackwood?" She accepted the champagne with a hint of a smile. "I should record this historic moment. Don't get used to it." But there was no bite to his words. Though I must admit, incorporating local artists was inspired. "That was the point," Olivia replied. "A charity gala for arts education should actually showcase art." Ethan's gaze lingered on her face. "You look different tonight." "It's called makeup, Mr. Blackwood." "No," he shook his head. "It's confidence. It suits you." Before Olivia could respond, Seattle's mayor approached, pulling Ethan into conversation. Throughout the evening, Olivia flitted from crisis to crisis, a spilled drink here, a misplaced place card there, always aware of Ethan's presence across the room, occasionally catching his eyes on her. It was nearly midnight when disaster struck. The dessert chef approached Olivia in panic. They'd accidentally included hazelnut in the chocolate soufflés already being served. "Stop the service immediately," Olivia commanded, rushing through the crowd to find Ethan deep in conversation with potential investors. Without thinking, she snatched the spoon from his hand just as it hovered above the deadly dessert. "What on earth?" Ethan began. "Hazelnuts," she whispered urgently. "There's been a mistake in the kitchen." The investors chuckled, but Ethan's expression was unreadable as he excused himself, guiding Olivia to a private terrace with a firm hand on the small of her back. "You remembered," he said simply, the moonlight casting shadows across his chiseled features. "Of course I remembered. It's my job to keep you alive, apparently." She attempted levity, but her voice trembled slightly from the adrenaline. "Is that the only reason you care if I live or die?" His voice had dropped to a dangerous timbre that made her heart race. "I don't care," Olivia lied, hyper-aware of his proximity. "I just need this job until I save enough for art school." "Art? School?" Ethan's brow furrowed. "You never mentioned that." "You never asked," she countered softly. The revelation hung between them, shifting the atmosphere. Ethan moved closer, his hand still resting on her back. "5 days," he murmured. "5 days, and you've reorganized my staff, charmed my most difficult business associates, and now saved me from anaphylactic shock. Who are you, Olivia Winters?" "Just a girl standing in front of a billionaire, asking him not to fire her for manhandling his dessert," she quipped, though her humor barely masked her nervousness. To her astonishment, Ethan laughed, a genuine, rich sound she'd never heard from him before. "I'm beginning to think hiring you was the smartest business decision I've made all year." "Only beginning to think?" Olivia raised an eyebrow. Their banter was interrupted by the sound of fireworks, the surprise finale she'd arranged. As they both turned to watch the display, Ethan's hand found hers in the darkness. "I have a proposition," he said, eyes fixed on the bursting colors. Above. "Stay on as my estate manager, and I'll fund your art school." Olivia turned to him in shock. "That's not charity I'm looking for." "It's not charity," Ethan replied, finally meeting her gaze. "It's investment in talent." A beat passed. "And perhaps in something more if you're amenable." The implication was clear, hanging between them like the fading embers of the fireworks. "I don't mix business with pleasure," Olivia whispered, though she made no move to pull her hand from his. "Then quit," Ethan suggested, his face inches from hers now. Effective immediately. "You're impossible," she breathed, but the words held no malice. "I prefer the term determined," he countered, and then his lips were on hers, tasting of champagne and possibility. When they parted, Olivia's practical side made one last stand. "This is insane. We barely know each other." "Sometimes," Ethan said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with unexpected tenderness, "the best investments are the ones that seem the riskiest at first glance." 6 months later, Olivia's art hung in a prestigious gallery downtown, while she split her time between art school and a certain billionaire's estate, no longer as his employee, but as the woman who had taught Seattle's most infamous bachelor that true wealth wasn't measured in stock portfolios, but in moments of genuine connection. And Ethan Blackwood, for his part, had learned that the most valuable mergers weren't always the ones that took place in boardrooms. Sometimes they happened on rainy crosswalks, in moonlit gardens, and in the quiet moments between two people who had found in each other the missing pieces they hadn't known they were searching for.